Welcome into Locked On Phillies, and today we've got a crossover with JD at Locked On Cardinals, previewing everything going on with the upcoming NL Wildcard Series between the two teams. Let's get it going on today's Locked On Phillies, Locked On Cardinals crossover.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, and let's bring in JD Afron, our host of Locked On Cardinals. JD, how you doing today, man?
I'm excellent, Connor. Good to be joined by you, and glad to be here. And I'm glad we're in the playoffs, dude. I know we got to battle against each other. I know it's a thing, but at the same time, it's nice to see you guys make it to the postseason. Congratulations.
Thank you. First time in 11 years. We don't have baseball heaven like you guys do out there in St. Louis. So it's been a while, but it's kind of poetic justice. Well, we hope it's going to be on our end because you guys are the ones who knocked us out of our last postseason appearance 11 years ago. And we all remember how that one went.
You remember that, do you? Okay. All right.
Yeah, just a little bit. Just a little. It's not as much your guys' fault. I don't hold it so much against you guys because the way that the organization collapsed after had nothing to do with that loss. But still, the Ryan Howard Achilles tear and the 1-0 loss and a Roy Halladay gem, yeah, that still hurts a little bit. But hey, who knows how this year's going to go? Happy to get in. It was touch and go for us for a little bit there. You guys have been pretty set because not that you're not a great baseball team, because you absolutely deserve to be in, but also division not great this year. So you guys had it locked up for a while. So the first thing I want to ask, we got in a couple different ways. The Phillies pretty much playing down to the end. They only clinched in their first game in the final series. You guys have had the division locked up for a little bit now. Are you worried at all about rust with the Cardinals, or do you think that's a benefit to them of knowing they've been in and being able to turn their eyes to the postseason for a while now?
I think it's a little bit of both. There's part of me that wants to stay sharp by playing against real competition and, having something to fight for in the last week and a half, 2 weeks of the season. And then there's another side of me that was happy to see guys like Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado, Tommy Edmond get some much needed rest. I mean, they've been playing every single day all year without any days off. So it was nice to get them a little extra rest. But I do worry. I worry that sometimes the team might get complacent. And, when you got to play the Pirates the last 6 games and there's, it's not a real competition. You got a lot of your B squad guys who are playing and everybody's just kind of going through the motions. And I worry about that maybe you come out flat in game 1 when something like that happens. I hope that it doesn't, but there's always like a small part of my mind that's a little concerned about that.
Yeah, it's a little bit of different competition level when the Phillies are finishing up their season facing Verlander and Framber Valdez down there in Houston, and you guys have Pittsburgh for 6. But, I mean, still, you're a 90-plus win team. Meanwhile, the Phillies struggled to make it to 87 and just clear their win total, which I had a couple dollars on. So that was nice for me. They got to where they needed to be. But
well done.
Yeah, a couple differences there in the lead-in, and also a couple differences in the starting pitching rotations for this, because the Phillies have pretty much known all year long it's going to be Wheeler, it's going to be Nola, and then the third was a little bit in question with Ranger Suarez. I can talk a little bit more about that in a second. For your followers on Locked On Cardinals, of course, go ahead and check out all of JD's work. You can follow him on Twitter at JD Sports Radio and figure out all of his stuff with Locked On Cardinals. He's going to have a lot of great coverage for you guys. If you're a Phillies fan and want to get behind enemy lines, this is the guy you want to check out to do it. But we're set. And meanwhile, I look over at the Cardinals' projected playoff rotation, and there's question marks all over the place. Now, I know you don't know for sure who's starting because it hasn't been announced, and we're going to hear that relatively soon here. But if you had to guess, who would you throw for the Cardinals if it was up to you? And what's going on with the question marks surrounding the game 1 starter and really the rotation for the series?
Well, if I had to take a guess, it's going to be one or the other. It's going to be either the left-hander Jose Quintana, who they got from the Pirates at the trade deadline, who's been remarkable since they got him. Like his ERA is around 1 since he's been with the Cardinals. Like it's
pretty good.
It's been wild considering where they got him from and his age and stuff. I mean, nobody expected him to be this good when he got over here. And then Miles Mikolas, the all-star this year, the right-hander who he had some ups and downs. August was a little bit tougher for him. He got things kind of straightened out in September, but when I look at the statistics for the Phillies, and I noticed that they hit a little bit worse against lefties. I mean, you guys got a good hitting ball club over there. It's not like, one dominates the other, but the numbers are a little bit more down against the right-handers than it is lefties. So I would think maybe Miles Mikolas get your start in game one. That would be my first guess. Quintana is a close second just because how good he's been for the last month and a half. So it just kind of depends on how he wants to, when I say him, I mean Ollie, how he wants to set up, whether he wants Montgomery to be like a game 3 possible starter, because it's going to be one of those two in game 1 and game 2. I'm pretty certain on that. Whether he wants to go Montgomery in game 3, who's another left-hander, and kind of break it up, and that way you would start lefty, then go righty in game 2. Or does he want to go righty, lefty, and just, let's just see what Wainwright's got in game 3, because he's been dealing with some dead arm stuff. And
right,
the question marks, I don't know why they've waited this long to announce what they're doing. I have no answers on that. I thought it would be something that he might announce right after the final game against the Pirates on Wednesday. And they said, well, we'll make an announcement on Thursday. And now we're still kind of waiting around at the time of this recording. We don't have any definitive answers just yet. But if I were to put money on it, if I were to go to BetOnline and I could put money on something like that, it would be Miles Mikolas would be my pick.
And we will talk about BetOnline coming up here just a little bit. They do bring us this episode, our friends over there at BetOnline. We'll give them their full love in a little. It's interesting because there's benefits to either guys. You could throw Mikolas from one side. You could throw Quintana from the other. You've got Wainwright, who's kind of the veteran, who it's like if you're going to go with a guy that you really trust the pedigree, you can, but you talked about the arm issues later on in the season. And that comes with age as well. But we'll see how they end up going with it. Now, I want to bounce something off you before I get into what to see from the Philly starters, because this is a theory that's popped up here in Philadelphia. I just want to bounce this off you as a baseball mind, not really something that deals with this series specifically, but there's been a conversation about start Zach Wheeler, and then if the Phillies were to win game 1, save Aaron Nola for game 3 so that he could start game 1 in the NLDS if they are to make it there. Is there any interest in doing that? Like, does that sound like something the Cardinals would do? Or do you think when they set this, they're going to say, hey, this is our game 1, this is our game 2, this is our game 3. Let's worry about the NLDS if and when we get there.
I think it's the latter. One thing I can tell you is that we don't have an ace or two like the Phillies do, where Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola, both of them would be the number 1 starter in this Cardinals rotation, no doubt. And we don't have that. We've got 4 capable arms, and we're not sure who that would be in the 5th as a part of the rotation. So you're not saving anybody. Everybody's game to start whenever they can. That's really how it is for these guys. There's no, like I said, there's no ace on this staff to save in case you got to the next round. Personally, I want to win the first 2 games and get out. I wouldn't want to screw around and think about what's going to happen in the next round until I get to the next round. Because when you start planning ahead a little too far, sometimes you forget about what's going on in front of you, and you don't want that to happen. So if I was the Phillies, I would definitely put the 2 righties, because here's the first thing. The Cardinals hit left-handers very, very well.
Right.
And they struggle a little bit against the right-handers. Why wouldn't you let your 2 dominant guys do their best and take 1 and 2 if they can, and then you get a couple days off, and then you can worry about what goes on in the next series when it happens.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. That's how I would go as well. I was just curious to see what your thought process was on that. And speaking of the 2 righties, Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola have been outstanding. I know we're going to talk coming up about your biggest concerns about the Phillies and who you're looking at that you'd be most worried about. These 2 would probably be near the top of my list if I was you, and we'll see. Yeah. I'll give you a chance to speak for yourself and for Cardinals Nation. But they've been outstanding, especially late. Wheeler actually kind of had the benefit of he was on the injured list for a little bit, which is not a benefit. But they kind of took a lot of time bringing him back. He could have bounced back a lot sooner if he needed to throw. And they had the added benefit of giving him some rest because Milwaukee was so far away. Now, it got a little bit tighter than we would have wanted it to because they choked against the Cubs, them being the Phillies. But Wheeler got a little additional rest, and he's looked really good since coming back. And Aaron Nola has been outstanding lately. Just took a perfect game into the deep past the 6th inning. So 6 2/3 he went against the Houston Astros. So they're coming and rolling right now. If there's a strength of this team, it's those 2 guys. And I agree with what you said, man. lock it up in 2 games because I don't want to go to a decisive third game, especially with all of them being on the road. That's not something I'd bet on. But if I was going to bet on it, I'd go over to our friends at BetOnline because betonline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. Find all of the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. JD, who's your football team? You have an NFL team?
Green Bay Packers fan, actually. I'm assuming you're an Eagles fan. I was prepared for this because, being in Philly, I figured it was the Eagles, and you guys have had a really strong start to the season, and we get to play each other, the Packers and the Eagles, later on at the end of November, which should be a fun matchup.
Absolutely. And there's 2 really interesting teams there. Aaron Rodgers, is he going to bounce back into form? Even though the Packers are hanging around, he could be better or better compared to how he is, of course, back-to-back MVPs. And the Eagles have been really good. So there's money to be made on both sides there with our rooting interest. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sport wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB. Got the playoffs, of course. That's what we're talking about. MMA, boxing, and golf. So head to betonline.net. Use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Now, JD, you said we've got a couple of aces that you guys don't have on the Cardinals roster right now. And then you guys have a couple of big bats that put together outstanding seasons that we haven't seen. And then over the past couple of weeks, there's been a bit of a drop-off with Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado. Are you worried about that heading into the playoffs? Or these 2 guys, they've been around for a while. They're veteran guys. They've proven they can do this year in and year out. Do you think they're going to round into form for this wild card series? Or are you concerned about their kind of downturn of production as of late?
Well, you never like to see any of your big guys struggle going into the final weeks of the season. It was a little disheartening because we were kind of rooting on our side for Paul Goldschmidt to make a real run at the Triple Crown because at the end of August, it looked like it was a possibility that he could do it. And then it's not that he was really bad in September. It's just he wasn't as good as he was the rest of the season. His numbers weren't anything to be like, oh, he's a terrible hitter all of a sudden. They just weren't at the level that he had been all season long. And perhaps part of that is just the wear and tear of the season. You get down to those last couple of weeks and it's exhausting when you're playing every single day. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, Goldie, Arenado, they weren't getting a lot of days off. And even when they weren't playing in the field, they were still DHing. So mental days, things like that, the game wears down on you after a while. And I have faith in them that they're going to be fine when they get into the postseason here. It's not like I'm overly concerned about it. What I am concerned about as far as hitting wise on the team is what the other surrounding pieces are going to do around them. Because if you decide that, you've got Gold, you got Arenado, and then you've got Pujols, who fountain of youth has happened to him this year. And all of a sudden he's this amazing number 5 hitter against not only lefties, but right-handers too. He's hitting everybody. He's hitting everything in his path right now. But outside of that, we've got some injuries where Tyler O'Neill's been hurt in left field, and it doesn't look like he's going to make the roster here for the wild card series. Our center fielder, Dylan Carlson, came off a thumb injury, but he's had a down year. You've got a rookie in right field in Lars Nootbaar, who is really good at getting on base, but hitting-wise, it's been a struggle for him in September. A lot of this offense had a rough time in September, and this is against teams who really weren't that good. We had a very easy schedule in September. It's almost like they peaked in August when they got to play against teams like the Braves and the Yankees, and they rolled into September, and then things really kind of cooled off. So I'm more concerned about those extra pieces than I am whether or not Goldie or Arenado are going to show up in this series.
And it's funny. It's very similar what you're describing there to what happened to the Phillies down the stretch, because you have guys like Bryce Harper came back off of his thumb injury. Gene Segura came back. Now, it wasn't quite down the stretch, but he came back later in the season with an injury that he had dealt with a broken finger as well. And those guys didn't really jump back to the form that they were in at the start of the year when Segura was very good and Harper was his incredible self. So they've been down, and the Phillies have struggled offensively through the last month. It's part of the reason why they hadn't locked up a wild card spot until one of the final 3 games. And really, it was their pitching that got them there. So I think the lineups are going to be very interesting to see. It could really be who's hot this weekend, because both of these teams have had a little bit of issues with continued production late. The Phillies, I mean, Bryce Harper's a guy that if I'm an opposing fan, I would never want to face. But he's hit 2, maybe 3 home runs since coming back from his injury. So that means his entire second half of baseball post All-Star break has been 3 home runs worth of production. Not great from him. And JT Realmuto, while he's put together one of the best seasons offensively by a catcher ever, only the second catcher to ever go 20 home runs, 20 steals in a season, catching up with Ivan Rodriguez on that one. He's still he is a catcher. Those numbers are good for a catcher, but it's not quite the offensive production that carries a ball club the way that we see now. Aaron Judge is not a great example because he's superhuman, but a guy of that caliber. So offense is definitely going to be a question this series. Could be a couple low-scoring games. I need to know, because the way that I perceive the Cardinals lineup, and I want you to tell me if this is a right or wrong way to perceive it. I see it as Arenado's great, Goldschmidt's great, but there's a pretty large drop-off between the top guys and the rest of the lineup. You rest your laurels on your 2 stalwart guys. Whereas the Phillies they've got guys that could get hot at any time, but the whole lineup is just streaky. So even the bigger names, their benefit is someone's going to be hot at any given time. Is it really just Goldschmidt and Arenado have to show up, or are there guys in the lower part of the lineup that Phillies fans should be concerned with?
Well, one of the names that I'll bring up to you is Tommy Edmond, who was the Gold Glover at second base, has moved over to shortstop this year because of the offensive deficiencies that the team had at the shortstop position. I mean, we traded Sosa to the Phillies to get
Thank
Romero,
you for that, by the way.
who, he wasn't hitting for St. Louis, not like he did for Philadelphia before he's been dealing with some injuries. If I remember that Sosa's been hurt a little bit, but he's been a lot better. Always had a great glove, and we loved him for that. But he just, for some reason, things were not clicking offensively for him, so he was deemed expendable. They moved Edmond over. We had one of our top prospects, Nolan Gorman, come up. Started out doing well, and then he fell off a cliff, and he couldn't even put the ball in play anymore. And you're right, when it comes down to what really triggers this offense, it is the Goldie Arenado show. Pujols has been incredible here in the second half, and I don't see any reason why he would all of a sudden stop hitting. I don't know why that would happen, but if there is a person that is a key to this lineup outside of those 3 names, it would be Tommy Edmond. And one of the things that they do is they kind of move him around the lineup. He's batted leadoff a few times. He's hit that number 2 hole, and then they've been sliding him down to number 9, number 8, just to give something, because you know how it is after the first inning. Nobody's hitting leadoff anymore. It moves around all the time. So they kind of go by that rule where there's no real leadoff hitter. They just want guys who have good on-base percentages down at the bottom of the order to get on in front of those guys. So what they've been doing, and I don't know if Edmond will hit leadoff. I don't know if he's going to bat 9th, but they kind of swap him and Lars Nootbaar, who's the outfielder, who's a below-average hitter, but he gets on base a lot. He walks a lot. And then they've got another rookie, Brendan Donovan, who's been batting second. He's a left-handed hitter, and he's kind of been that Swiss Army knife where he's been able to play all over the place. But lineup-wise, he's found a home in that number 2 spot. Another guy who will take pitches, who will work the counts and try to get on bases any way he can in front of the big guys, Goldie, Arenado, and then Pujols. But outside of that, Carlson in center field's kind of been a black hole of a hitter where he can't seem to hit right-handers, which is a problem considering Wheeler and Nola are coming at you here in just a little bit. He's been great as a right-hander because he's a switch hitter, so he's been great against left-handers, but he can't seem to do it against the right-handers. So Tyler O'Neill, he's been hurt all year. He's the Gold Glover in left field who got some MVP votes last year, but he's dealing with a hamstring issue. Doesn't look like he's going to be able to go in this series. So we've got the corpse of Corey Dickerson, who's been playing left field.
And I miss Corey Dickerson. We had him for a little bit, 2019 or 2020. Those years all run together.
Yeah, and he had a moment, there was a stretch for 3 weeks where he was out of this world.
That's what he does.
He went on this streak, and you're like, holy cow, look at him go. And then September came, and he vanished and became the Corey Dickerson we saw for the first couple of months of the season. So he's another guy that is kind of thrust into the starting position out in left field. I mentioned Donovan at shortstop. You've got Molina, who's still around, but he's not much of a hitter anymore. So there's nothing really to sweat there. I mean, we've been giving him this moniker. We were calling him September Yachty because he was coming through a little bit more clutch, but he really hasn't been very good. So it's been down to those guys, but if there's a guy to keep an eye on, it'd be Tommy Edmond. And if there's a guy that's going to come out of nowhere and kind of maybe step up and be a bit of an X factor, I've been saying Dylan Carlson, the center fielder, because of the switch hitting capabilities.
Gotcha. Now I want to turn this so we kind of analyze each other's team a little bit and our biggest concern going into this matchup. And we're going to go back and look in the mirror after this and do our biggest concerns for our own teams. But I'll start just looking at the Cardinals. My biggest concern are those big three guys. And I haven't mentioned Albert Pujols a bunch because I wanted to leave a little time at the end to discuss him specifically. There's something else that I have a question about with Pujols that we'll get into in a little bit, so don't go anywhere. But it's Arenado, it's Goldschmidt, it's those guys can take over a series. For me as a Phillies fan, that's my biggest concern. You can't run into a game where Nolan Arenado goes 3 for 4 with 2 homers, but there's times where he's so good, it seems like there's nothing you can do. And Paul Goldschmidt can do the same. They both play exceptional defense. This is a series really where it may only be 2-3 guys that make the Cardinals offense run, but those guys are good enough to take you wherever you need to go. So those are my biggest concerns, is just the ability that they can take over a game. And really, they only need to do that once. Solid bullpen, good enough starting pitching, and before you know it, the Phillies are out of the playoffs again. And it's a short return to the playoffs. So is that a fair concern there?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, obviously you want to fear 2 guys that you got one of them who's likely the NL MVP this year in Goldschmidt, and then Arenado, who's going to get some votes probably too. That makes perfect sense to actually key in on those guys. And again, with your starting pitchers of Wheeler and Nola coming from the right side, that's going to be a fun matchup to watch those guys battle each other because they hit lefties a lot better than they do righties. And then you got 2 studs like the Phillies have. So it's going to be cool. Like, it's going to be a lot of fun. Baseball fans are really going to enjoy these battles between those 2 starters and then those 3 hitters, if you're including Pujols into that.
Yeah, I can't wait. It will be a really fun series compared to the other wild card series. So even if you're just finding this by accident and trying to figure out what to do with your weekend, great series going on.
Yeah. Think about it, because you're going to have Bryce Harper, your NL MVP from last year, your likely MVP this year, and Paul Goldschmidt going up against each other. And you've got 2 offenses that have got some pretty big names. You've got Mr. 700, Albert Pujols is going to be in it. And then if you want me to go ahead and take over here and tell you who I'm scared of.
Go ahead.
Obviously, your pitchers with Nola and Wheeler are a problem. Wheeler has dominated the Cardinals this year, and it hasn't even been close. I don't think they've scored upon him in 14 innings, if that's the stat.
Back-to-back shutout starts against them, against the Cardinals. So,
like that's good or something. Yeah.
Not bad. We'll take it.
As far as the offense goes, though, there are some familiar names that Cardinals fans are going to notice in the lineup for the Phillies. Mentioned Bryce Harper. I know he struggled a little bit this year. He's dealt with injuries, which has brought him down a bit, but he's still Bryce freaking Harper. You know, you're not going to take him for granted. Rhys Hoskins has hurt the Cardinals this year. But 2 names that have done damage against them in the past. We still remember Kyle Schwarber with the Cubbies hitting bombs over scoreboards at Wrigley Field against the Cardinals.
Your NL home run leader so far this year. Well, I guess not so far. Season's over, so NL home run leader.
Yeah, but we remember him killing the Cardinals when he was with the Cubbies, and he's the same slugger with the Phillies. So obviously you got to fear that power. And then, of course, we've got our old friend Nick Castellanos, who did a lot of damage when he's with the Cincinnati Reds against the Cardinals. So there's some people there that Cardinals fans are going to be like, oh, no, not these guys again. We got to see these guys again. And then you add them into the mix of Rhys Hoskins and Bryce Harper, JT Realmuto. I'm shocked that the Phillies only won 87 games this year. I have no idea how you managed to only win that money, because on paper, with your 2 starters, and I assume the bullpen might be a little bit of an issue that caused some of the problems, but on paper, you guys were incredible. Like, game-wise.
Actually, you know what? The bullpen was really, really good. There was a stretch of about 2 months there from June to July, which is where the Phillies really were on fire, where the bullpen was one of the best in baseball. The issue was Joe Girardi was not really the guy for this team, and you took about a month and a half's worth of the season muddling at the start, where they were 7 games under 500 when Rob Thompson took over in early June. So that was just it was kind of a dead in the water team who stopped listening to the manager. And that was more the issue, was trying to make up that ground. So a better start to the season, they probably would have been fine.
A question: What has been the difference since Thompson took over? Like, what is he doing managerial wise that is better than what Girardi said? You mentioned that he might have lost the clubhouse. What are some things that he does that has improved this team from a manager point of view?
Well, he's a much more communicative guy. There were points. Nick Castellanos actually came out and said after Joe Girardi got fired, he had a total of 2 conversations with Girardi since he'd been with the team, and that had been multiple months of the regular season. So just the communication, you know how long a baseball season is and how important the clubhouse dynamic is. Didn't sound like that was great. And the management of the bullpen, which is funny to say about a guy who had a major league career as a catcher in Joe Girardi, but he didn't have a good handle of establishing roles in the bullpen. It'd be a different guy in the 7th and 8th inning every night. The Phillies had trouble finding a closer, which was partially because they didn't bring in guys that were capable of that role. And that's not Girardi's fault, but Rob Thompson came in, he established roles. He established a lineup that was a lot more consistent than what Joe Girardi did. And the consistency, it just pays off when guys know where they're batting, where they're playing, what inning they're pitching every single night. So that's the biggest difference. And it really is. It's what you said. This team was great on paper. Just set it in stone, let them go out and play every day. And eventually, well, they're going to hit the numbers on their back of the baseball card and they're going to be a good team. So that was the biggest difference.
Okay. Yeah. See, we got lucky this year with our rookie manager, Ali Marmol. Is he was already the bench coach here too, kind of like, how Thompson was already a part of the team, and he knew these guys and has been friends with these guys, and he's their age. He's in his late 30s, so he's been able to really be a good guy, almost like one of the boys in the clubhouse, and it's worked out nicely. He's also been that guy that said, hey, you're going to have to earn your spot. Like, if you're not hitting, you're not playing anymore. And he hasn't been afraid of pulling the plug on certain guys who looked like they had starting positions, like Dylan Carlson in center. When he wasn't hitting against right-handers, he wasn't playing against them anymore. It was over, even though he was one of those names that was mentioned as one of the reasons why the Cardinals wouldn't go get Juan Soto at the trade deadline, was the fact that Dylan Carlson was kind of an untouchable. They didn't want to move him. They're benching him against right-handed pitchers. He was like, no, he's not getting the job done. So we're going to pull him. Nolan Gorman, top prospect, hitting a lot of home runs, but then he started to struggle. Didn't see playing time anymore. Sent him back to Memphis. He hasn't been afraid to sit people down when they aren't performing what they should have been capable of doing. And I think people respected Ali for that. And I think it's worked out kind of nice. You guys have a lineup where it's like a set it and forget it type of thing, where he is constantly moving things. You might see 3 different lineups over the next 3 games if it goes to 3 games. It's a possibility, man. He's not afraid to switch people out.
Yeah, and you've seen success both ways in Major League Baseball. It depends on what works for you for the team. There's a Joe Madden approach. There's a Buck Showalter approach. So who knows exactly how it's going to work out. But 2 different managerial styles from 2 guys that came into the job strikingly similar ways. And while Thompson a little bit older, it's interesting to see how that's worked out. Now, I think we've voiced our concerns pretty well for our own teams, for each other's teams. We've covered that pretty well. We're going to end with our predictions for the series. But the one other thing I want to jump into, I know you're a sports radio guy. I do the same. And we know how narratives not only can carry a fan base's perspective, but it can affect the team a little bit. And these are 2 teams with really interesting emotional narratives. The Phillies back in for the first time in 11 years. The Cardinals kind of at the end of an era with Yadier Molina, Adam Wainwright, Albert Pujols, that emotional removal from the final game they played in the regular season. You have Pujols' run to 700. And there's such a almost nostalgic but still here type of story that's developed surrounding this Cardinals team. Do you believe? Oh, and we've got the 700 t-shirt there that you're pulling out. That's awesome. See, like something like that creates a narrative with a fan base that can create more emotion in a clubhouse, that can lead to a team going on a magical run. Do you think that magic is real for the Cardinals this year? And does this feel like a team destined to do something special because of all of the special things going on around them?
We like to call it the Cardinal Black Magic or Devil Magic, as it's also been called by
I
not
don't
only
love
our
that for the Phillies.
not only by our own fans, but other teams have been calling it because they're like, every year you guys come up and all of a sudden you're in the playoffs again, and then people are sick of it, and I get it. But yeah, the emotional thing is for real, because if you noticed, this team didn't really take off. They just kind of were floating around second place in the wild card behind the Brewers until the second half of the season, and until Albert Pujols became the machine again. When he struggled in the first half and he's hitting 215, he's got 6 home runs. He looks like a broken down old man. He goes into the home run derby. Everybody shows him this, just this love.
Kyle Schwarber lost to him on purpose. I'll die on that hill.
I agree with you. I think he did too. He's like, oh no, I didn't make it. Oh, big deal. Watching it, I was saying the same thing. I'm like, look at Schwarber being all cool. Yeah, let the old guy through the door first. Yeah, that's really nice of him. But the moment where he was in the derby and the players all surrounded him and started clapping for him and patting him on the back and showing their appreciation for all the years that he's been in the league, I think he took that to heart and all of a sudden realized, you know what? I got to kind of show up, because I don't want to go out like this fat guy that was with the Angels and the Dodgers last year. I need to be me again. I need to focus. I need to get it right. And he's taken off here in the second half. It's been nuts. And like the only guy hitting more home runs than him in the second half was Aaron Judge. And we've discussed how amazing that guy's been. He's been a robot this year. He's so good. Albert, there, second, 18 home runs in the second half of the season, hitting in the 320s. And this team absolutely fed off of it. The fan base fed off of it. Yachty was hardly around. Yachty was dealing with knee injuries and just hasn't been the same guy. Wainwright dealing with the dead arm, but they're still there. And it's still the fact that, like you mentioned, them coming off the field together on their last home game, that was something special. And it was an amazing ride to watch them get to be back together at least one final year for Yachty and Albert. We're not sure what Waino's going to do just yet. We're kind of hoping, because until September, he looked like he was ready to go for another couple of years. But I definitely think that emotion is a super important part of this game, and having Albert doing what he's doing and the way the team just gravitated towards it, I have no doubts it made a difference in what happened during the regular season and what's going to happen going on into the postseason here. I think they go as far as those feels, if you will, for Albert will take them, because he's been the guy, even when Goldie and Arenado haven't been hitting here in September, it's been Albert who's been clubbing home runs and driving people in and being that clutch hitter. And if he continues to do that and you get the normal stuff out of Goldie and Arenado, Philly, you're in trouble.
They certainly are if that happens. And I'm going to put your feet to the fire real quick. We'll get an actual prediction as we wrap up, because we're a little bit over time. How do you see this series going?
Well, first off, I hope Zach Wheeler catches food poisoning and then cannot pitch. And no, then
he's not answering the door for any pizza deliveries. No Michael Jordan here. No, he's going to be good.
I would see this. I definitely think this goes 3 games, and I will give the upper hand. Here's my reason I give the upper hand to the Cardinals, and it's not me just being a homer. It's the fact that what they do in St. Louis, they're a totally different team at home. On the road, I don't even know if they finished 500 this year. At home, one of the best teams in baseball, home record-wise. I think they were top 3, I believe. Might have been number 2. So I think they ride the fact that they got home field advantage. They got the home fans. They're going to have 46,000 plus there at Busch Stadium rooting them on. You got the Albert stuff going on too, and I just think that carries them past a Phillies team that just has underperformed this season. I think Wheeler probably wins one of those games, and I think they're able to take the other 2.
Yeah, you know what? I agree with you saying it goes 3. I don't think Wheeler and Nola are both going to lose, especially because of the struggle against the righties that the Cardinals lineup has. I do think that this is the best possible matchup for the Phillies. And I know you said you're not going to be a homer. I don't think you are being a homer with your pick, but I'll be one with mine, because, what are you going to do? I'll take the Phillies 2-1 in this one. I think it's going to be a razor's edge that separates these teams, though. And I do think the difference is going to end up being that home field advantage. I'm kind of arguing against myself a little bit. But you know what? For the sake of backing my guys, if it's going to go 3 games, I'll take the Phillies in an elimination game and see if Ranger Suarez can pull it off. But hey, that shows you just how exciting of a series it's going to be. It's going to be
Mhm.
must-watch television. We're going to be doing short little 10-minute back and forth post games after each of the 3 games, if we're assuming it's 3 games, or 2
Yeah.
if it happens to go shorter, unfortunately, for one of us. But you'll be hearing a lot of JD and myself together. We'll be doing our nows and our immediate reactions, and you'll have podcasts from us on our respective channels. So, JD, where can everybody find your work for Locked On Cardinals?
All right, Locked On Cardinals. As far as social media is, we're at LO_Cardinals. Obviously, we're on YouTube as well. And then, of course, you can find us on all the places that you hear our podcast from the Locked On Network, whether it's iTunes, Google Podcast, Apple. We're all over the place. So you guys can find us wherever any of these podcasts are located. And then my personal Twitter account at JD Sports Radio. Anytime you guys want to converse and go back and forth on there, more than happy to talk to the Phillies fans as well, man. We're looking forward to this series. I think it's going to be a really, really good one.
It will be an easy man to find. I love that. And I'm the same way. You can find me at Connor Thomas 975. All our work on Locked On Phillies at LO_Phillies and wherever you find your podcasts, YouTube, all that good stuff. You hear me say it all the time. We want to thank you one more time for making Locked On Phillies and Locked On Cardinals your first listen every day. We're both free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Make your second listen Locked On MLB. Paul Francis Sullivan. If you like these crossovers, well, he's covering baseball in general, all of Major League Baseball, getting you ready for the playoffs and all the big series. So you can listen to Sully's work on YouTube and everything. Yes.
Hands up. You'll take me in the front row. By the way, did you hear who Sully picked to win the World Series?
No, who did he pick?
After the trade deadline? St. Louis Cardinals.
See, okay, never mind.
St. Louis Cardinals.
I'll take back that plug. Don't listen to Sully. Just listen to Locked On Phillies and Locked On Cardinals.
Sully's crazy. Don't listen to him.
No, he's great because of how crazy he is and great content and everything. JD, this was great content. We'll make some more of it in the coming days. But thank you for taking your time to join us today. And good luck to the Cardinals. As much that you have a fun series, but not so much that you win.
We're looking forward to it, Connor. Thanks for having me.
No problem. This is fun. We'll talk to you next time. You guys have a good one.